What's going on, guys? Hope you're having an absolutely fantastic day. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about why a Chinese invasion of Taiwan is increasingly likely, right? So bear in mind, I'm using the word likely, not confirm or anything, right? And going from maybe a 1% to 2% is also more likely, right? And I'll share what I think the percentages are at the end of the video, right? So we'll start off with America and the sanctions, right? So basically, China and America have been in this Cold War since basically 2018, when Trump came into office and he said, oh, China is manipulating their currency and doing this and doing that, so we can't let them get away with it, right? So Biden's hugely consequential high-tech export ban on China, explained by an expert, right? So basically, long story short, Biden is blocking any high-tech semiconductor exports to China from companies like Nvidia, AMD, and also all these other companies that are allies with the US, right? So why is because they say they don't want the Chinese to further their development of these high-tech technologies because they are afraid of national security risk, which is basically hacks. One more cynical reason is they don't want China to get ahead, which is also understandable. And also, lastly, they don't want China to have this kind of technology, maybe because of the fighter jets or because of the economic activities that China have been doing, right? And China has been developing. So next, we move on to Xi Jinping tells China army to focus on preparation for war, right? And bear in mind, I'm going to give a balanced view, right? Because I'm going to talk about all the things that are happening and the precursor to all the other war events. And then also I'm going to be talking about why China might not want to invade Taiwan. And these are all factors to consider before we make our ultimate conclusion, right? So going back to it, Xi Jinping tells China's army to focus on preparation for war, right? So Xi Jinping told the People's Liberation Army to focus all its energy in on fighting in preparation for war. So that's not a really good thing to hear, especially since, this comes just a few days after basically Biden has blocked their exports, right? So you can see this is November 5th and this is November 9th. So in 4 days, they have been making this announcement, right? So it could just be a coincidence or it could not be, right? So next is Chinese protests, right? So why is protest important? Some people might be wondering, oh, this guy is using everything as a negative. But it's not, right? Because protests are important because when there is internal conflict in a country, right, most of the time what happens is they want to export that internal conflict, right, by going to war with other countries to change the focus of the country, right? And this has happened in the past, right? So I'm not being like out of bounds or whatever, right? So if we take a look, we know that protests have been happening in China because of all the restrictions and all the lockdowns, right? But what you may not know is this is also happening in the past, right? So not one to one the same thing. Not because of lockdowns, was World War II, right? But if you can look at what caused World War II, right, there is not one event that suddenly caused World War II. It's a build-up of many, many years of issues, and then it erupts in the form of a specific date, right? Because when there are wars or any special events, people always assign a date to it, right? Because people don't want to look back at all the history that has happened, maybe the past 10 years leading up to it, what happened, all the cycles that are happening, right? Because people want a simple answer, right? But if you want the truth is that the years leading up to the declaration of the war, right? Basically, the Allied powers and everyone was going through the Great Depression, and the Great Depression was from 1929 to 1932. So this started 10 years later, right? The war started 10 years later. So during the Great Depression, what actually happened was Germany basically and some of their allies basically owed money to the allies, which is like UK, US, and all these other countries, right? And basically they squeezed Germany, and Germany couldn't even pay the interest on those debts, right? And then what the allies did was they took away productive capacity from the Germans, right? So if I ask you, you have a credit card bill with 20,000, you can't even pay the interest on it, right? So now that you can't even pay the interest on it, I'm going to take away some of your assets that help you generate some income, right? So, for example, you're a carpenter. So I say that because you can't pay this 20,000 credit card bills interest, which maybe, let's say, 200 a month or 2,000 a month or whatever it is, right? Let's call it 500 a month. You can't even pay the interest. Now you're struggling to pay the interest. You can only pay 480 a month. So for me to make up that shortfall, right, basically I take your tools away, right? Maybe one month I take a saw away. The next month I take your hammer away. So you can see that that actually moves you backwards, right? Because maybe from being able to make 480, now you can only make 470, and then the next one is 460. So eventually, this is what caused World War II, right? And then we look at the second thing, which is what caused World War One. I'm not saying there's a one-to-one correlation, but I'm saying all these events are usually present before a war breaks out, right? There will be civil unrest, and I'm sure I'm not covering everything, right? But I'll cover what I can think of at the moment, right? Civil unrest, political uncertainty, economic uncertainty, and a war between classes, right? Between basically the rich and poor, people that want it to continue staying like this, and people who want change, right? So you can see that before World War One, there was also economic crisis in the US. So Panic of 1907. So the Panic of 1907 was basically the stock market crashing and all these rich people losing their money, right? But what actually ended up happening after that was there was a lot of bank runs and a lot of these banks collapsed, right? So you can see this is setting the stage again for 1914, which is the First World War, right? So 1907, people lose all their savings. There is political hardship, economic turmoil, because people are like, how can you not regulate the banks? How can we just lose all our money, right? So then you can see there's economic turmoil because everyone just lost their money, right? So then you can see after that, there was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, right? And when you can see that the tensions are very high, right? So how come an assassination of Archduke of Austria-Hungary can, lead up to all the allies joining the war, right? That is another long story. But then you can see that if everyone is happy in their country, right? If take China for an example, right? China never really participated in wars in the past, right? Because everyone was, not to say incredibly happy in their country, but they have enough to eat. I mean, a lot of them starved as well, and a lot of them were poor, but that's besides the point, right? Their country was basically self-sustaining, right? If you look at all the countries that have went to war, initiated the war, right? The UK, basically no resources in their own country, no food, stuff like that. So before that, it was all the Nordic countries that are very cold, there's no farming and all that. And then after this is Germany, when they were squeezed for resources, right? And Germany does not have a lot of resources, right? They don't have oil and all these things, right? And Japan also is another one that basically is heading the war, and they don't have a lot of resources, right? And the ones that are being invaded are resource-rich countries, like basically Russia is one that has always been one people always want to invade. Another one is let me think of it. Yeah, China is another one that people always want to invade as well, right? So you can see the common theme here, right? If your country does not have resources, out of desperation or out of greed or whatever the reason is, people will invade eventually, right? If times are not good within the country. So next, I want to look at Russian GDP, right? Because this tells you a story of why they went and invaded Ukraine as well, right? So you can see Russian GDP actually did quite well after the 2008 collapse, right? It was climbing, and suddenly after 2010, it basically just... So before that also, it was shitting the bed here because of the long-term... I'm pretty sure it was Russian bond defaults somewhere here, right? And then you can see that after this happened, basically they were on a steady climb, and then basically the virus happened, right? And after the virus happened, I think a lot of people were very unhappy with the Russian government, although their polls will always say, oh, we love our Russian government, right? And the Chinese polls also say we love our president, right? Or whatever they call it. But you can see that these are some of the contributing factors. I'm not saying economic factors are one-to-one on why certain politicians do certain things, right? But I'm saying it is a contributing factor that within your country, if people are not doing well, people want you to step down, right? You want to shift their focus away from you to, we have another enemy. Let's unite to defeat this enemy first, and then we'll think about my problem later, right? And often after this conquest, you become a hero, right? So there is a saying that goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? And that is very prevalent within all these things, right? Politics especially. So if you're enjoying the video so far, do help me smash up the like button, hit subscribe, and also hit the bell button and press on all, right? So this will really help out the channel, and also watch till the end, right? Because obviously you don't want to miss any important information. So now we get to the part where China, why China probably does not want to invade Taiwan, right? So let's start with sanctions, right? So this is definitely the biggest one, right? Economic sanctions, right? Because China does do a lot of trade with the global, basically the world, right? And I think their citizens basically welfare will be down a lot, right? Basically the economic prosperity for citizens will be much lower if they couldn't export, right? The thing about this is it's a very tertiary or secondary effect, right? So basically what you want to do is you sanction people to make their citizens' lives hard. So it sounds very bad or what, right? But this is just how the things are done, right? So if the citizens' lives are hard, right? What will they do? They will call for a re-election, or they want the government's heads on a spike, right? And that is the way that you bring on some change, right? So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Most of the time it works, right? Because anytime, no matter how prosperous your country is, when you lower people's living standards, right? When you start to lower, people are unhappy, right? So if you get to drive a Rolls Royce, now I tell you, you only get to drive a Porsche, right? Suddenly you're like, what the hell, I only get to drive a Porsche? So then you'll start to say like, oh, this is the government's fault, or whatever it is, if it's the government's fault. So next is geography, right? So we all know that Taiwan is an island, right? So the island is basically titled a fault block, characterized by the contrast by the two eastern two-thirds, consisting mostly of 5 rugged mountain ranges, right? So geography does play a big role when it comes to defending nations' defense, right? Basically, if you have very good geography, like basically the US, right? So one of the reasons US did really well in the past was because Mexico and Canada were great allies of the US during the wars, right? So even though basically the US had conquered, I don't know, half of Mexico or something like that, but that's a story for another time, right? So, and then the two other parts of the US, right, is basically wide open sea, right, which is easier to defend than if it's a lot of rough terrain, right? So that is also some food for thought. So I think I put it in the wrong order, but this is probably the second biggest reason why China would not want to invade Taiwan, right? And it's TSMC, right? So some people are probably saying, isn't this the main reason why China wants to invade Taiwan, to get their semiconductors technology and all that? So first of all, I'm going to counter to that, because I would say if you want to get all this technology, right, all you have to do is be willing to be a few months behind, right? So you can always send someone spies or whatever. I'm sure China or Russia, everyone has it, right? So send spies or whatever to learn trade secrets from manufacturing company, rather than invade the whole manufacturing company, because these are also skilled laborers, right? So if you invade them, it's not easy to get them to do what you want them to do, right? Or another way to put it is, you can force them to do it, but maybe they do it at 30% of their capacity when they are motivated, right? So that is also not a good thing for China, right? I think it's better for them if they want to get all these secrets to basically send a spy or something, right? And the next thing I would say is, this is a sign of China not moving towards this route, right? Because we are just thinking about risk here, right? And risk is the possible different routes that things can go, right? So risk is basically the realities that we don't want to happen, right? So a risk can be China locking down again. A risk can be China invading Taiwan. A risk can be China basically fully opening up. These are just alternative routes of reality, right? So China opening up is a good sign that they're not taking forward steps towards this invading of Taiwan, right? Because if they are easing and letting loose a bit, right, it's because the citizens are really getting pressure to them, right? And this is also what I say, right? Protests will get pressure to them, and their reaction will be what dictates, history and all of that, right? So at this current point in time, the things are not so bad that they will invade another country to take the focus off, right? So that is one reason why I still own stocks like Alibaba, right? But of course, I do discount them at a little bit of a multiple, because obviously there are geopolitical risks and all, right? But at the moment, at that time, when I bought Baba stock, it was so cheap to ignore, right? And geopolitical risks were not as present, right? So mind you that this came out on November 5th and I bought BABA way back, right? A few months back, right? So all in all, after weighing the, basically I'm going to call it pros and cons because I can't really find the words for it, or positives and negatives. So I think it's still quite unlikely for China to invade Taiwan. And we do have to bear this in mind, right? Even if it's a 1% or 2% risk, right? Because the moment China sets foot on Taiwanese soil, right, all our Chinese securities are basically worth zero, right? Or at least it will be sanctioned and you can't touch your money for a long time, right? By the time you get to rearrange, maybe you get back a few pennies on your dollar, or maybe 10 cents on your dollar or something like that, right? So that is also what I'm personally looking at. So at this point in time, it's not the dominating narrative that, you know, China is going to invade Taiwan. I'm not so sure about that, right? I would peg it from maybe a 1% risk. Now, because of all these situations happening, I would maybe say it's gone up to a 3% risk, right? But still, to my mind, it's highly unlikely. And this is showing me maybe it's going down, right? After, obviously, this is only 1 day or a few days ago, right? So obviously, the risk might be de-escalating, right? So yeah, that's about all I wanted to share today. If you did enjoy the video, do help me smash up the like button, hit subscribe, and also hit the bell button, and comment below, right? What do you think? Did I miss some information here? With that being said, have a fantastic day ahead, and peace out.